Which is better, the Samsung Galaxy A14 5G or the Samsung Galaxy A13 5G? Well, in this video, we're going to find out. What's going on, everyone? This is Kevin here, and in this video, we're going to be comparing these two very popular, affordable 5G Android handsets from Samsung. Now, the Galaxy A13 5G was launched in December of 2021. This device has been very successful ever since reaching the market, and I believe it was actually one of the top-selling Android phones of 2022, like possibly even in the top 5. So this device has been very, very successful. Now, the Galaxy A14 5G is the successor to the A13 5G, and this device was recently launched in January of 2023. Now, I'm sure there still are quite a few retailers still selling the A13 5G, and that probably will continue for quite a while, but the Galaxy A14 5G clearly is the next generation. Now, in many ways, the A14 5G is just a continuation of what made the A13 5G successful. It's not like this phone is dramatically different, but at the same time, there are quite a few differences and upgrades that do make this device noteworthy and possibly worth upgrading if you have an A13 5G right now. Now, I will be leaving links to both of these devices in the video description so you can see the most up-to-date pricing and availability. However, I do recommend taking a look at your favorite carriers to see what different promotions they're offering for these phones, as they do tend to be quite a bit cheaper and have better deals associated with them at the carriers themselves. Now, the first thing I want to discuss are the displays that we're getting here with the phones. There are quite a few similarities, but with the A14 5G, the display is slightly larger here at 6.6 inches versus 6.5 inches with the A13 5G. Now you can see side by side here, the two phones are nearly identical in size. However, it does seem like the A14 5G is slightly larger. You can especially notice this when putting the two phones directly on the table here, but overall they're nearly the same size. Now, the general form factors of the front panels here are nearly identical. Both phones have water drop notches up top. They also both have slightly thicker bottom bezels. However, when looking at the two displays, without a doubt, the Galaxy A14 5G has the better display of the two, and there are multiple reasons for that. The first thing is, overall, this display is brighter and the viewing angles are better and the colors are a lot more accurate. But in addition to that, this phone features a 1080p display versus 720p with the A13 5G. Now, beyond that, we're getting PLS LCD technology with the A14 5G versus PLS TFT with the A13 5G, but with both phones, we do have 90Hz refresh rates. So that faster refresh rate certainly makes the phones feel a bit more premium than maybe they actually are. So overall, it's a great decision by Samsung to give them 90Hz as the refresh rate, especially compared to kind of the more lower end phones that typically have 60Hz. Now, there's especially a large difference when it comes to the PPI, which makes sense due to the resolution, but with the A14 5G, we have a 400 PPI compared to a 270 PPI with the A13 5G. Now, both phones do feature 20:9 aspect ratios, which I do like. This kind of more narrow but taller form factor here does make these phones ideal for social media, as you can fit more of your feed in a single frame. And then when it comes to the screen to body ratios, they're very similar. However, with the A14 5G, we have an 80.2% screen to body ratio versus 81.1% screen to body ratio with the A13 5G. So overall, when it comes to the displays here on the devices, the A14 5G is a pretty dramatic upgrade. Now, another upgrade definitely has to be the front-facing cameras. As I mentioned a little bit ago, the front-facing cameras are located in these water drop notches, and with the A14 5G, we have a 13 megapixel front-facing camera compared to a 5 megapixel front-facing camera with the A13 5G. Now, moving on, let's talk about storage. Now, both of these phones do feature 64 gigabytes of internal storage, and they both offer microSD card expansion. So 64 gigs is not bad as it is. That's a pretty good amount for a lower end Android smartphone. And then adding in microSD card expansion gives you the ability to offload photos and videos, for example, to free up even more internal space. So overall, you should be pretty good to go. Now, neither of these two devices feature wireless charging, which is a bit unfortunate, but that's not a feature that you typically expect to find in this particular segment. Now, both devices do feature fingerprint sensors on the power buttons, and we'll give that a try right now, starting with the A14 5G. So we'll try that. There we go, got into the phone. Now we'll try it with the A13 5G. And also very fast and responsive. So I'm certainly glad to see that feature, and overall that placement is pretty convenient, at least for my preferences. Now, in addition to that, both phones do feature Face Unlock, so I do appreciate that we have multiple methods here for accessing the phones. And if you want to, you can have both enabled at the same time so that if you do end up using the fingerprint sensor, if maybe the face unlock catches you first, then whichever one catches you first will initiate the device to go to the home screen here. So certainly a nice, fast, and efficient way for accessing the phones. Now taking a look at the back of the two devices, there are some similarities but also some differences. We have a triple camera setup on both phones, and both devices have 50 megapixel main cameras, 2 megapixel macro cameras for close-up images, and 2 megapixel depth sensing cameras for portrait mode. And there is portrait mode for both the rear and front-facing cameras. Now here's how things look on the camera apps on the two phones. This is the main rear camera right now on both devices. So, of course, looking through the viewfinder isn't necessarily the best indication when it comes to quality. So let me take a photo of this plant with both phones, and then we'll kind of compare the quality by looking at the displays. So, pulling this up here, of course, this is just one example, but you can see already how much better of a photo the A14 5G takes compared to the A13 5G. Much better colors with this plant, and overall, everything's a lot more vibrant. You can especially see the blue in the background is a lot more bold compared to the A13 5G, where everything's just a little bit bland here. So, overall, I would say this one example really does kind of tell the story for both of these phones and how the cameras are different. You're going to be really impressed with the cameras in the A14 5G, and they really are a lot better. Now we'll flip around to the front-facing cameras and do the same thing. You can already see just through the viewfinder how much more color there is in the photo from the A14 5G or even from the preview here. But we'll take the photos right now, okay? And then we'll take a look at these samples, and yeah, I mean, you can see how much better the A14 5G is in comparison. I mean, it's hard to believe that this is one generation to another. It really seems like it's about 3 generations in between these two phones. So that's very impressive there. So nice job, Samsung. I really appreciate that they actually make it a priority to give even their lower end phones nice upgrades and good features. Now then from here, you can do portrait mode with both phones. So I'm not really going to do a sample here. I think you get the idea of the difference in quality, but you can see both phones do offer that. And then there's also portrait mode for the rear cameras in both as well. So I would say when it comes to the cameras with these phones, the A14 5G is a very large improvement in comparison to its predecessor, and I'm really glad to see that. Now then from here, let's talk about the RAM and processor. First thing is, both phones do have 4 gigabytes of RAM, however the processors are very different. The first similarity though with the processors, and hence the names of the phones, is that they are both 5G compatible. Now at this point in 2023, I do think you can get by without 5G, but at the same time, if you're going to go through all the time and effort of getting a brand new device, I feel like you should get one that actually uses your carrier's latest and greatest network. But as far as the differences in the processors beyond the similarity of them both supporting 5G, is that one of them is the Samsung Exynos 1330 for the A14 5G, and then for the A13 5G, we have the MediaTek Dimensity 700. Now I did run benchmark tests using Geekbench 5, and I'll show you the scores right here. You can see with the A14 5G, I got a single core score of 527 compared to a single core score of 443 with the A13 5G, and then quite a bit of a higher multi-core score with the A14 5G compared to the A13 5G. Now you can see right here, both phones are running Android 13. The A13 5G actually originally came with Android 11. This phone has since gotten 2 updates to Android 13, so that's awesome. I really appreciate that it's up to date. And then with the A14 5G, it came with Android 13 out of the box. So this phone will be getting a lot more updates, of course, into the future, as the A13 5G has already gotten several updates. Eventually, once they get to 4 updates, I believe, they're not going to do any major Android software updates anymore. But for the A14 5G, since it hasn't even gotten a major Android software update yet, because it was up to date out of the box, there's going to be many more updates coming out in the future for this phone, giving it a lot more longevity in comparison. So just in that part of it alone, I would say the A14 5G is the better choice. Now moving on to video recording. Both phones record 1080p video. It is nice though with the A14 5G that you can actually view 1080p video on this display and see the full resolution because it's a 1080p display. Now both phones, as I mentioned, run Android 13 as the time of me recording this video, and then they both feature Samsung's One UI 5, which is full of many awesome features. Now battery capacity is the same here. Both phones feature 5,000 milliamp hour internal batteries, and they also both feature up to 15 watt fast charging. But make sure that you're actually using a 15 watt fast charger so you can achieve those fast charging speeds. Now beyond that, both phones do feature NFC so that you can do tap and pay, So you can use services such as Samsung Pay and Google Pay. So that's very convenient. Certainly a big fan of that. So that's pretty much a summary of the various features and specifications that are different between these two phones. I'll talk about the hardware in a second, but overall, when it comes to my analysis of the differences here and the upgrades we're getting with the A14 5G, of course, this phone is better in every way compared to its predecessor, and at the same time, I wouldn't say it's anything dramatic as far as the upgrades go. I would have liked to see an ultra-wide angle camera, for example, but unfortunately we're not getting that. But at the same time though, I really appreciate how much better the cameras are here with the A14 5G, and I think that in itself would make this worth the upgrade, but to add on to that, the much better looking display is a very significant upgrade too, and then also having faster processor speeds too is a nice thing to see as well. Now beyond that, both phones are made completely of plastic. I will say though, I kind of prefer the back on the A13 5G. It's a little bit more rounded compared to the A14 5G, which is more boxy. Now I don't actually mind the A14 5G's boxy, but this material on the back just picks up a lot of smudges and grease, and it kind of has like a interesting texture to it, but I feel like that almost makes things worse. I really kind of just prefer the very boring, simplistic texture on the back of the A13 5G. It's just easier to keep clean, but overall, since both of these phones are made of plastic, I do recommend getting a case to pair up with either one, as plastic does get very scratched up as time goes on. Now taking a look at the left side of both phones, they both have the slot for the micro SD card and SIM card. Then on the right side, both phones have volume up, volume down, and then also the power buttons, which double as the fingerprint sensors. Then up top here, both phones have noise canceling microphones. And then on the bottom of the two devices, we have 3.5mm headphone jacks, microphone, USB-C port for charging and data transfer, and the speakers. So as far as the layout of the speakers, ports, and buttons, it's pretty much identical between the two phones. But I am curious, do you prefer the boxier design of the A14 5G, or do you prefer the more rounded design of the A13 5G? Then on the back of the two phones, I already talked about the differences in material here. I'm sure probably everyone agrees with my opinion. It's just kind of a really strange material on the back of the A14 5G. And then the camera modules are pretty similar in appearance, but of course the cameras are much better here with the A14 5G in comparison. So overall, I'm very excited about the Samsung Galaxy A14 5G. I feel like this phone is going to be very successful for the company, considering that the A13 5G was one of the top sellers of 2022. Of course, that makes sense. This phone is still packed full of value. You're getting a lot here for the money, and a lot of people just aren't looking to spend $1,000 on a smartphone, which is totally fine. But the A14 5G really is a nice improvement over the A13 5G, but at the same time delivering really even more value. So I'm very confident this phone will be one of the best sellers of this year. But I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, definitely give it a thumbs up. Let me know if you have any questions in the comment section below. But with all that said, this is Kevin, and I'll see you in the next one.